Hi, Mud.
Hello, yeah, we're just waiting on a couple of folks. We'll get started shortly. Thanks for joining, everyone. All right, welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar on the topic of generative AI. Um, I'd love for somebody to confirm on the chat that you can hear me just fine. Yeah, great, awesome. Thank you. I see a couple of thumbs up. Really appreciate it. All right, let's get started. Thank you again so much for joining. I'm going to share my screen and get started. Should be a very fun, interactive session today for us. Let me start with a couple of notes. So first of all, I want to share that we'll record this session and send it over to you. So if you feel like you have to take notes, feel free to take notes. But if you feel like, hey, you want to come back and revisit this session later, you can certainly do so. Q&A and discussion is entirely welcome. I will appreciate anybody who wants to jump in and ask a question. If you're thinking about a question, it's very likely there are a few others who are also thinking about it. Raise your hand, unmute yourself, mic and camera. That's my only ask. If you are going to ask a question, please unmute both mic and camera and share your name and company and then ask your question. And you can feel free to interrupt if you have a question where you're looking for an answer. I think it'd be good to have that discussion. And I will say I'm not the expert on this topic by any means. I've obviously have a lot of interest and I've done quite a bit of work in this space, but I know that many of you might have had experiences that the rest of the folks here can also possibly learn from. So let's be mindful of that and feel free to share your background and opinion. Okay, let's get started. I want to share this one chart to begin with. So 2023 has been a really interesting year for tech in many different ways. So on one hand, while there is a tech recession going on in many ways, you can see funding drying up and companies starting to shut down. You're also seeing the rise of large language models in ways that we haven't seen before. I tend to not use the term large language models because the term AI, in my opinion, is now very overloaded and it gets used for quite a few things. And we're going to jump into some of that. But what you're looking at in this chart is the time and number of days to reach 100 million users. If you look at every technology that has come before this, the number of days it took for that technology to get exposure has been in matter of weeks, months, years. And ChatGPT was one that immediately made the word term AI absolutely mainstream. Each one of us who has tried it has really felt the power of what it can do. And now everybody's interested in figuring out, like, hey, how can I leverage this in my day-to-day life and work? So we're going to spend some time on that as well. And what I'm going to do is, in terms of agenda, my goal is to have a bit of a loose agenda in terms of the first 25 minutes or so. We're going to do some of the laying the foundations of what is AI, what is machine learning, what are the different forms of it, and some of the concerns regarding it. And then majority of today's session, what I want to spend on is showing use cases. Now, it's always very risky to do live demos because inevitably doing those tend to have failures. So we will have those. So I apologize in advance when those happen, but we will try to make it all work. And one of the things, if you all are near a computer, I would love to at least do one activity or one part of the workshop where you're following along and creating something something new that is going to use generative AI, likely in ways that you might not have used before. Besides the first 25 minutes of the presentation, it's not going to be death by PowerPoint. So, just stick with me for the first 15, 20 minutes, and then we're going to have a lot of interactive work that builds on that foundation. And I'm gonna try my best not to bore you all to death. Lastly, I want to spend a few minutes on safety of AI. There have been some recent developments. You saw the Biden administration's executive order and the conference that happened in the UK about safety of AI, and there is a lot of development now starting to happen. When I prepared these slides, we didn't have any executive order. We didn't have any foundational work on this, and that stuff is going to be also really interesting and possibly relevant. Okay, let's see. Is there, may I ask everybody else to go on mute while you're not speaking? That way it's, it doesn't have any other noises, but I'll pause. Like, is there any other noises that are coming up? I can also switch over to a different audio if I do this. Is this loud and clear? Okay. Also going to put do not disturb on my computer so I don't get any dings or Slack or any of that. You will hear time to time when people join or leave the conversation, but that should be ideally not that often. Okay, let's jump in. We're going to skip this part because we have too many folks in the room. I do want to give you a quick introduction to myself. So my name is Imad. I have been in the space of machine learning for at least 10 years, which makes me feel really, really old. But about 10 years ago, I joined PayPal and was very excited to see the amount of data they had. But what got me even more excited is the opportunity to build interesting machine learning products that for that time were probably very revolutionary. And the story I want to share here is the use case that I got to see. So one of my jobs was to do customer segmentation. And typically how companies do customer segmentation is they'll hire a consulting team that will come in, interview a bunch of customers, they'll analyze a bunch of data, and then come up with a few segments. And that had happened when I arrived. Now, the problem is, how do you go and identify each individual customer, of which in this case, like we had 45 million active customers, and we needed to identify each one of those as which segment do they belong to. And that's a very difficult task to begin with. And that's where we were able to implement machine learning to not only discover new segments, but tag each one of them. And when we used machine learning to do it, we found segments of customers that we would normally not see by doing the activity of interviewing customers. And one of those segments was we found customers who were shopping in all different categories at the same time. And you were basically baffled by the fact that how is this one person shopping in completely opposing categories all the time? And we found that it turned out to be PayPal users who were sharing their passwords with their spouses, and they both had a single account, which made us realize that, all right, this account, this type of a behavior is not uncommon. It's actually fairly prevalent, and enabled us to like do marketing and targeting and messaging very differently. Then this happened 10 years ago, so this has been around for a long time. I got a chance to do similar work at Facebook before starting a company called Retina.AI, which many of you are a part of and know of, where we did a lot of machine learning to predict customer level behavior, predicting the value of each individual customer coming in. We worked with clients large and small, from Capital Ones of the world to Nestle's of the world, and now very much in the world of enabling CEOs and execs on implementing AI ML in their own organizations. And my background is, this combination of technical and business. I've had the opportunity to do this. I'm going to jump into some of the context setting, and I'm going to try to keep it short so we can jump into the more exciting stuff. I see a question here. Let me see if I can answer that. Would prediction on LTV, was there a back analysis to gauge accuracy? Really good question. So David asked a question on, can you analyze how accurate your models are? So when it comes to predicting customer lifetime value, which is what Retina does, there's a very clear way of evaluating that model by doing something called a model backtest. What you do is you hold back trailing 12 months of revenue related data from the model, and you try to use the model to forecast that revenue. If you can forecast that very accurately, both at the aggregate level and at the individual customer level, then you've built a good model. Now, what's interesting is, while that type of modeling required a lot of deep scientific data science knowledge in the past, now you can use large language models to approximate those models really, really well without having to do a lot more deep amount of work. Now, that's a completely separate topic, but that's an interesting question for sure. All right, we'll jump in. What is AI and history of AI? Let's cover that. So what AI is, it's a general technology that can solve many, many problems. And you can think about it as a technology versus a tool. So if you think about cell phones, right? Like you would think about like, okay, cell phone could be thought of as a simple tool that can be used to make a phone call, but now over time, it's become a very generalized form of technology that can have apps, it takes photos, it can do so many things that it has almost become an extension of us. And that is already happened. Where it has now become where you'll see AI becoming an extension of us. Now, in many ways, this train had already left the building several years ago. If any of you have traveled to a country abroad and used Google Translate, or used any kind of spam detection for your email, these are all parts of some form of machine learning that we'll talk about today. But what is different with large language models is it has this generative nature where it can now have new, very generalized applications, which we'll dive into. I'm going to not cover too much of the depth of history of AI, but I will cover a few like pivotal moments. So back in 1997, IBM's Deep Blue defeated the world chess champion, showcasing AI's capabilities. And that was one of the first pivotal moments that we were like, wow, these machines can actually, just because they had a lot of data, and in the case of this Deep Blue case study, was all brute force. What it means is that you have a human competing in a game of chess against a computer, and the computer can pretty much compute every single permutation of move that Gary would make, and then be able to respond to that. Now, that's a very high compute way of figuring out which move to do. But today, that has become a lot more generalized, where you don't need a brute force method, but the machine can actually think about what the different possibilities might be and only go on that one chain of thought, and it can follow and come up with answers much more quicker without as much deep compute. And that's the big difference that happened by 2017, where Google, a few folks at Google launched this paper called Attention is All You Need, and invented this thing called transformers. Now, you don't need to know the depth of what transformers do, but in very loose terms, they were able to replicate some functionality of how even a human brain makes decisions with these things called neural networks. And what's really fascinating about neural networks is they were able to create these machines, put in data, and see the artificial intelligence working, but it's very hard to actually decipher what's going on inside the black box of the machine when it comes to neural networks. And this problem is still true today, that many of us don't actually understand why the machine is making the answer, to the depth that you can explain why which neuron fired where. That type of logic doesn't exist, but it works impressively well. So there's lots of interesting thought processes there that, like, if you don't really understand or can't explain why the algorithm answered a question in a certain way, you have a lot of questions to reckon with around privacy, data regulation, bias that might be included in the results of your model. And then 2020 and 2021, GPT-2, GPT-3, and ChatGPT came about and became very mainstream. So let's talk a little bit about AI today, right? So there's a lot of history behind it, but what I want to give everybody a preview of is the 3 types of AI that exist today. And there are really 3 different types of algorithms. There are a few others that I'm not going to go talk about right now, such as reinforcement learning that exist as well. But we're going to talk about these 3 primary ways: supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and self-supervised learning, or generative AI. So let's talk a little bit about how do you identify all of these. Let's start with supervised learning. So supervised learning is the form of where you have a plethora of data that is labeled as inputs and outputs. So for example, if you take all of your emails in your inbox, you could label each one of them as spam or not spam, and you could manually go do that. What that does is it enables you to train a system where you can, it's a spam filtering, I should say spam filtering, where you can tag each email as a spam or not. And what the machine will do is, over time, it will try to figure out, based on the copy of the email, what triggers might you be correlating with somebody with tagging an email as spam or not. Once it's figured out that rule set, it will then say, all right, I'm ready to score new incoming email, and I as a machine will start to tag it spam or not. So at the fundamental level, that's what supervised learning is, where you give a machine a bunch of training data set, where you enable it to understand what the inputs are and what you as a human how you would label those inputs or outputs, and then enabling the machine to learn from that, and then letting it do the scoring. So now I've introduced a couple of terminologies, which is training data set, and a model that has to do scoring, or which I'll start to refer as inferring the results, inference. You also have other examples of these ads, right? Which ads are working and which ones are not. So a very simple way of creating an understanding of which ads are effective or not are when customers will see an ad on Instagram or Google and click it or not. So the ads that get clicked more are the ones that are treated as high click-through or high relevance. And as that happens, the machine can learn what about an ad generates a high relevance response. So those type of examples. Reviews, another example of like positive or negative sentiments of reviews. If you give you can train an algorithm to do that. So these are some examples of supervised learning, and these exist all around us today. We all use this in one way or the other, depending on what technologies we're talking about, but a very simple one is email to think about. Now next one is unsupervised learning. Now, unsupervised learning is really interesting because here, again, you start with a large set of data and you enable the machine to go find naturally occurring segments or partitions of labels inside the data set. Now, this could be, again, a number of use cases. One of the use cases I shared earlier was my story from PayPal, where we were looking at customers and different category buying data to determine which customers are sharing passwords or not. Now, in that case, we didn't tell the machine, hey, here are some customers that are sharing passwords. We just said, hey, here's a bunch of data. Here's how the category buying percentages vary. Figure out what are the 4 or 5 prominent categories of customers in there. So it does the job of saying, all right, I've analyzed all this customer data, and I've found that there are 5 different categories, or 3 different categories, or 1 different category of data here. So that's what supervised learning is about. I'm gonna grab some water. If anybody has any questions, feel free to drop it in the chat, or also you can unmute yourself and ask it. All right. I don't see any questions, so let's keep moving on. All right, let's try to think about what is generative AI. So generative AI is another form of machine learning, but here what you do is you start with a version of supervised learning. So let's say I shared this prompt: I love eating blank. Now, if I went around the room here, we have 45 participants. I am going to get various different answers, but there's likely that like 5 people answer the question in the same way. And if 5 people answered the same way and everybody answers differently, then I can assign the probability that this answer will be, let's say bagels is the answer that comes up at least 5 times. Then this blank will be filled by bagels based on the distribution of the population that's attending this webinar, and say, all right, that's going to be the next word. So it doesn't end there. You could repeat that process, right? So I love eating bagels. What's the next possible word? Now, if I ask the room, some people might say the sentence ends there. Other people might say, I love eating bagels with, or I love eating a bagel with, might be another word. And you can keep iterating. And that's essentially what these large language models are doing, where they will keep predicting the next word based on all the data that they have seen in the world. Pause for a second. I hope everybody followed that, where what large language models are doing are continuously predicting the next best word based on all the data they have seen. Now, there is a lot of technical detail we can go into how this works, but I'm going to try to keep it to the highest level just so that everybody's on the same page. What this enables us to do is build models that have the data of the world, like billions and billions of lines of text, where we can feed that into a machine and say, hey, given any sequence of sentences, what's the next possible word? And you guys have all used ChatGPT. You're going to start to feel how true this is. You go into ChatGPT and say, hey, you are a doctor that is working in the field of cardiovascular diseases. What are the top 3 cardiovascular disease conditions that exist out there? Now, you giving it that context of that you're a cardiovascular and you physician and you're looking for those, it can then be a lot more specific about which next words it goes and finds. And fundamentally, it's doing those things. And it's almost comical how simple this technology is compared to a lot of the machine learning work that has existed before. at the very end, at the core of it, it's doing this like very fundamental, very basic thing that continues to happen. Now, the implication of that for a lot of folks in this room is that up until yesterday, if you came to me and said, hey, Ahmad, like, I'd love to like dive into machine learning, how do I use it? My first response back to you would have been, do you have the data? Have you been collecting data in a very structured way for the last 3 or 4 years? And 9 out of 10 times the answer would be no, we're just starting our like new product, or we're just starting our new pivot or new business, and it makes it very difficult to like do anything about the machine learning side of things. But now with large language models, you don't need a lot of data. You can start with very small amounts of data and still come to some really meaningful predictions and suggestions about different insights about the business and different actions you can take in your businesses. All right. I hope you guys were able to follow that. Let me look at a question that came in on the chat and see if that's something I can quickly answer. And if anybody else has a question, feel free to unmute and ask as well. All right, so the question here is touching a bit on your engineering. When it comes to analysis, what's the best practice to implement AI capability? I'm assuming that I would get all the data, train it correct. So accurately build models. Yeah, so as I said, right, so that's what my answer would have been. So the question is, do I need a lot of data and do I need to set it up to train it? The answer would have been yes. In the past, I would have had to have you collect all the data, purchase tools like Databricks or Hex or some like deep analytical tool to do that. And today you might actually be able to get away without doing a lot of that work, depending on the need or what you're trying to do. So for sure, there will continue to exist. And I think supervised learning is going to continue to be one of the largest subsectors of AI and machine learning. However, I think what generative AI is now doing is enabling people to get started much easier and faster. All right. So there's a lot of hype about generative AI as well. And let's talk a little bit about the hype versus reality. The reason I want to talk a little bit about that is I kind of feel like we're in a very dot-com-y bubble type space in many ways, where you're seeing massive venture investments go into generative AI. And I don't know if there's enough space for, like, yes, there are some really good use cases, but a lot of things that we did yesterday aren't changing, and a lot of things we're going to do tomorrow aren't going to change. But there is still going to be quite a few things it will impact. So it's keeping that in mind, what are some of the capabilities that do have use cases for large language models? And I'm using the term large language models and generative AI interchangeably at the moment, but really it's all very similar technology. So what can it do? So it can translate from any language and tone to another, and that is a very interesting. I think it has very interesting implications. So when I was back at Facebook, one of the big tasks we used to have is anytime the product team launches something, anytime the global marketing team launches something, everything had to be translated into 115 different languages and localized to different regions, which made it extremely difficult because you had to do all of this very, very manually. We had droves of people in different regions who were responsible for doing that type of work. It was slow. It was very hard. Now that type of work can be done in a quick chat window, which is really, really a big like game changer for any businesses that have to do business globally and have to do those type of changes to tone and language. Now, I want to chat a little bit about another language that is going to become very interesting. So machines also speak a language, and they speak the language of APIs, which is programming interfaces. And the ability of humans to talk to machines was in the past limited by people who knew how to program, people who knew how to code, who knew how to code Python, C. You had to know some sort of a language, right? that I think is really interesting, that it's going to start to go away. Now you're going to have, anybody with a really good idea who can meaningfully craft the narrative of what a machine should do for them can go teach a machine what to do, because the machine itself now can write the language that is needed to take that action. So we'll look at an example of this even today, and where the world's headed. If any of you have not watched OpenAI's demo day yesterday, or announcement from Sam Altman, I highly recommend watching that. I think that there have been like 2 or 3 talks in the world of AI that have really changed my perspective of the potential of what things could be. And the one yesterday by Sam Altman was certainly one of those, I thought, which really opened up your eyes on all the different things that can happen. The other thing it can do is deal with structure and unstructured data in really meaningful ways. So one of the examples might be, let's say you are building software for time tracking. You're a consulting firm and you want to enable all your 20,000 consultants to be able to do time tracking wherever they are on the road. And these consultants know which clients they're working on. Today, they're kind of bound by their laptop. They have to log on to some SaaS software, go through the drop down, pick like which client they worked on, and put in the time. Now you can take unstructured data such as a voice note or like even a text note and say, hey, look, I'm a consultant. I worked on client A, B, and C, 30 minutes for the first, an hour for the second, and 10 minutes for the last. Just that sentence can easily be structured into a table format that can then be ingested by your database in a very easy way. Like that simply wasn't possible. That would go into the realm of what a typical data scientist would call is like data cleaning hell. And then you would have a really difficult time figuring that out. And now you have a machine that can really take that unstructured data and turn it into structured data really quickly. Personalizing a response, I don't have to mention too much. Each one of you who's crafted an email on ChatGPT for somebody has already used this technology. This thing, it will do really well. And in fact, I think what this will do is it will break down the barriers that we have of communication. Very often, we have 2 employees who have different styles of communication, and the person communicating a message may not be thinking about the reception of the message depending on the style that is coming from. So for example, if I'm a very direct communicator and I love to be very direct without providing context, and I Slack somebody, hey, here's what the message is, and the other person prefers context, background, maybe there's something in the middle that can like add that context, or at least ping me back, be like, hey, you just messaged this person, and knowing their style, I would recommend you add some context to make it a little bit more easier, and it will remove all these like friction barriers that we have for communications. It has thinking and logic and reasoning, which we'll see a little bit more of later. And then the stuff that I feel very excited about is its ability to generate text, images, voice, video. Like you pick a format and it can build it, and it can also analyze it. So I was spending some time with a close friend who's looking at building a satellite company, and he used to work for a company where satellite images are analyzed by humans, and now you can have satellite images analyzed by machines that can then tell you what insights you should be looking at, right? So imagine when, and obviously this never got solved, but like you have the MH360, when it disappears, you have humans looking through thousands of images to find debris of aircraft. You couldn't even do that using machines back then. Then that was not that long ago, maybe like, I can't recall, but like less than 10 years ago. And now you can go and do that. Okay, there's one question here. What is the best solution to translate big text from one language to the other? Really good question. We're going to take a look at a couple of the tools today. I think if you were to do it in a systematic way where you're translating sections of text, I would recommend using OpenAI's GPT-3. And if you just want to take a document in a PDF and read the translation, which I just had to do the other day, you can use Claude, and we'll jump into that. We'll show some of those examples as well. Okay, I have definitely gone over my first 20 minutes of death by PowerPoint, so I apologize for that. So let's kind of jump in. One other last thing I'll share is, if and I think everybody's wondering, like, hey, what areas are going to get impacted by this technology the most, and which ones are not? And here I've seen a lot of information that I don't agree with. I mean, you look at a McKinsey study, and it's like, only healthcare is going to get impacted by this amount. I don't think so. I think almost every field is going to get impacted, but the first places you're going to see are sales, marketing, software engineering, data science and analytics, and another one, which is customer service. I think that's going to become a lot more optimized using large language models, but I still don't think it will get replaced. In fact, I have multiple examples of CEOs installing customer service large language models and then ripping them out, because the edge cases where it doesn't work, it actually can do quite a bit of damage. And it's interesting that we haven't made that leap yet, where you can just replace the full functionality of humans. I'm sure that will come, but I've yet to see that. All right, let's move on. We are going to talk about AI safety a little bit, but now I do want to spend the next hour or so at least going into some of the examples of and demos of use cases. All right, I'm going to show you guys something that's a little bit more recent. Help me prepare a speech I'm about to do it. Let's say if I'm about to do a speech, write a speech, I need some help on that. So in the past, I think most of you, I would have told you, like, go to ChatGPT and share a prompt that says, hey, I'm about to write a speech about a certain topic, and please go and write that. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to share with you something even more different on how I now write or prepare my talks before chatting with somebody. So I'll stop sharing my screen for a second. Can everybody see my video? Cool. All right. I'm going to show you. So if you haven't downloaded the ChatGPT app, I highly recommend it. And if you look at the ChatGPT app, it now has several options. One of the options it has is this talk conversation version. Hi, help me prepare a speech that I'm about to give to a group of executives about the topic of artificial intelligence. And please be sure to include the 3 different subsections of supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and generative AI.
Certainly, preparing a speech on artificial intelligence for a group of executives is a crucial task. Here's a structured approach to your speech, focusing on the 3 key areas: supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and generative AI. Introduction. Begin by setting the context. Artificial intelligence is reshaping industries and challenging traditional business models. Emphasize its significance in decision-making, efficiency, and innovation. Section 1, supervised learning. Define supervised learning. It involves training AI models on a labeled data set where the outcome is known. Application.
Great. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start sharing my speech with you, and I'd love for you to give me feedback as I prepare the speech.
Fantastic. Please go ahead and share your speech. I'll be here to provide feedback, suggestions, or any other assistance you might need.
Great. So I have done 3 talks now where I've used this assistant. All I've done is I've gone for a walk, I've put my headphones on, and basically had a conversation with ChatGPT on helping me prepare, structure, and finally, this is the part that I was just blown away, is memorize my speech. When you actually do a talk, like, memorization takes quite a bit of work and repetition. And now that you have this repetition part, somebody who can partner with you to do the talk, it's completely changed how every talk I've built so far. This is not a prepared talk, so that's why I'm stumbling through this one. But other than that, I tend to use this. Anyone else have any thoughts or questions on this? I wonder if anyone's used the speech, a speech part of GPT-4.
Just to jump in, I haven't used that yet. I was just about to, but one of the other apps that it's out there is called Perplexity. You must have heard of this. I think you might have suggested it to a group. And it's integrated, I believe, GPT-4 and Claude 2 and Copilot, which I'm not totally sure what that is. But do you use that application as well? And is essentially the same output that you're getting? Other than Sorry,
yeah, so I think it's a really good question, and I think it's a good segue into the topic of search. So yesterday I was having a conversation with one of the partners at Embark VC, and we had a pretty heated discussion on the future of search and the impact of LLMs. So Scott, I'm going to give some context before I share more about Perplexity. I'm going to share my screen. When I open up a new tab on my machine, you'll see it doesn't go to google.com. It doesn't go to bing.com. It opens up Perplexity. I have now been using Perplexity.ai to do most of my searches. There are times where I will switch over to Google when I'm looking for a specific page. But whenever I am trying to figure out any specific question. So here's an example: OpenAI Dev Day recap. What was discussed? It's giving me the answers directly. But not only that, what I like about Perplexity is it's not just making it up. There's very low chance of hallucination because it's giving me references to where it's finding the data. So all of the stuff that Google would do. So essentially what it's doing is it's doing a search in the background. And then once it's done doing the search, it's actually giving me answers with the references. And I don't need to click through 5 different links before I come to the conclusion of my analysis. So I'm using this quite a bit. I think what you're right about is you can turn on this thing called Copilot, which I also have no idea what it does, but I believe that what it does is it turns on GPT-4 instead of GPT 3.5 and maybe enables you to take actions. But I don't know much about what it has done. But I will say is switching over to Perplexity has been really helpful. Now, I have noticed that the answers Perplexity AI will give me are often going to be concise, versus on ChatGPT, I can have it give me a very long documented answer. So for example, one of the things I have done in the past is I've done a whiteboarding session with a customer where we talk about what a solution might be. And instead of me then building a PowerPoint presentation, I literally was able to take notes and say, hey, build me a statement of work that includes all of the work that we talked about here. Here are the bullet points, and literally copy pasted that into a Google Doc and printed to PDF, sent it to the client, and they signed it, and we got working immediately. And that has changed even one level more, where we are seeing this new feature in ChatGPT where you can just simply include images, and it will figure out exactly what's going on in that image and can come up with notes. So I'm sure many of you have seen that demo where you can give it a wireframe diagram of a software you want to build and just say, hey, look, give me the code that makes things look like that. So I think that's a really interesting feature, and maybe we'll do a quick demo of that as well.
Yeah, I too have used this as my primary go-to now, even for creating blogs, white papers, all of that stuff, you name it, doing all the research, and the attribution to the actual data where it's coming from, to your point, is flawless. So it's great for market research and things like that too.
Amazing. Well, thanks for your feedback on that, and that's great to hear. All right, so we talked a little bit about this. I'm gonna start crossing off the stuff that we talk about, just so that, see if I can get back into. So you guys notice that my presentation is not in PowerPoint or Google Sheets. Maybe that's one other thing I want to share with you at some point, is how do you build presentations using AI, and how it can make presentations really easy and fun. Okay. I don't know how many of you pay for ChatGPT, but I have been paying for it for the last 2-3 months, and I use it almost every day. There are 2 pointers I want to give you about using ChatGPT, just as something as over time as we've learned, and even I've gotten instructions from folks who I've learned from in other workshops. There are 2 things they'll make your ChatGPT experience a lot better. Number one is context size. So when you give it a query or a prompt, the shorter the prompt, the harder it is for your for this to learn your style, and also like what context it needs to pull from. So the general rule of thumb that I've heard is that you want your prompt to be about 450 words for you to be able to get really, really meaningful results back. So that's one piece of advice. And the other one is this thing called custom instruction. So what custom instruction does is it enables you to not have to provide a super long prompt with a lot of context. So in mine, I just put this where I put like a little bit of my bio and even a little bit about my family and what I like to do. And then I've included my custom instruction on what my tone is, and I've even shared some historical writing styles, so it knows my style, and it doesn't just give you back that very formal answer every time. This is what you can do, that it goes on. Most of us, when we first use ChatGPT, it feels somewhat impressive, but then you're like, the novelty wears off, and you're like, oh, I don't use this language, so I'm not going to use this. But this is a pretty easy way for us to like give it some of these custom instructions, so that it's a lot more relevant to our topic and our ask. So here's so I want to just share again. You go to settings. No, not settings. Got that wrong. You go to custom instructions, and you'll see that right there. All right, let's go to so we talked a little bit about custom instructions and suggested word count. All right, product description and logo. So one of the things I think would be really interesting is talking a little bit about something called the few shot learning. So now that we've talked about, I already said a word or two about the size of the prompt. Let's talk a little bit about what these prompts might look like. I promise this will probably be the most boring example I do today. I'm going to try to do the more fun ones in a second, but let's show you what we can do to create good product descriptions and even logos that we might want to attach. So one of the concepts is something called a 0-shot, 1-shot, or a few shot learning. Let me start with this. Give me, and I'm going to try this live. Give me a product description for this product. So what I just did is I did 0-shot learning. I gave it no examples of what I want my product description to look like, and said, all right, GPT, go to town. And what it did is it did exactly that. It came up with this super long description, which is not what I'm looking for. So what we can do is we can do something called a few shot learning. What is few shot learning? Few shot learning means that you give it some examples. So instead of me typing the whole prompt, I'm going to paste it here, and I'm going to walk you through what the prompt is. So what I'm going to say is generate product description based on the following examples. So I give it a bunch of examples. Here's a product. Here's the description. Here's a product. Here's the description. And now I say, here's the product. Give me this description. Let's see what it comes back with. So if you remember, it gave me this like super long description in the past. And now it's kind of giving me this one paragraph that's not that dissimilar. It's still longer than what I would expect, but at least gave me a very similar description to what I'm looking for. So the concept I want you all to take away from this is that the more examples you give ChatGPT to answer your prompt, the higher the likelihood that it will actually give you the kind of answer you're looking for. If you can do zero-shot learning, which is don't give it any examples, it'll answer your question, but very likely you're going to be disappointed by that. Now, let's say I have the product. Let's create a logo for the product. Now, using the DALL-E plugin, create some examples of logos for the product. You see, it's starting to use the DALL-E 3 plugin, which is OpenAI's generative image function, and it's going to create a couple of image options. While this shows up, let's see. I have a few questions here. Let's come back to the questions I'll share. So here are some examples of logos it came up with that I can then obviously use any one of these. But now let's say, hey, I want to place the logo, see what the logo might look like in a different setting. Now take the first, and I don't know if I've not tried this, so let's see how this one goes. Use the first logo and put it in a different background in an outdoor setting along with the product. Let's see what it does. All right, so it understood that my request is to like do another image. It figured that out. And now it's going to create the image. So while this one gets created, there are a few comments and questions we can quickly cover. Speaking of attribution, should AI get the credit or the human? So really good question. We had just had the speech yesterday from Sam Altman, and other companies have followed suit, which is that they've decided that if any IP related issues come about based on who gets based on the AI generated content, that they're going to take some liability for it, which I think is massive. I had no idea like these Gen AI companies would go that far. So that was interesting. I don't know the answer for sure, but that's kind of my thought process on that. In the OpenAI announcement, they're decreasing GPT-4 pricing. That is correct. So it's funny that you brought that up. Evelyn mentioned that here. Yes, we are. I haven't seen it yet. I've not like actually seen if my bill has gone down, but they've said that they're reducing the price 3 to 5 times, which I think is massive because GPT-4 was expensive enough that and slow enough that many of us never used it. We were still using GPT 3.5, and now that GPT-4 API pricing is much lower, I think more people will certainly use it. And I agree, Midjourney is still much better than DALL-E 3, but there's one thing about DALL-E 3 that I think is interesting, which is it can now include text. So let's see if I can. Great. Now, can you add the name of the product in this image? And by the way, let's check if like it was able to use the same logo or if it used a different logo. So it looks similar, but it's not quite the same logo. So, you know, it has some of those issues. in this example. The other question is, you're calling DALL-E 3 in ChatGPT. Is that a GPT-4 only functionality? I don't think so. I think that's that functionality. If you have ChatGPT and you pay for it, you should have that now. And they're rolling it out to everybody, but most people should have that. All right, here's an example. So yeah, I think it got some of these letters wrong, but this is one feature that they're trying to improve. And you can also see, like, when we do these, how like imperfect it is, and it's not ready for production in many ways. So being mindful of that is also important. Right, Ajay, I see a hand raised. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi there, how are you? So I had a quick question with regards to, so for example, we're using a project management software. We've used it for a while, 5, 6, 7 years now.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's got a lot of data for our company in terms of how people do their work. What's the best way to get that into a learning model like this and then have it just answer questions for people?
Yeah. So in the past, I would have told you to go like 5 different places, but now, literally as of yesterday, OpenAI launched this thing where you can upload files and do this ask the question, so you can generate an assistant. So we'll talk a little bit about this, but you can now do this where you can create an assistant for your organization and eventually use like Slack connector to connect it. So we probably have some examples of this where we can dive into today, but I would use either OpenAI and its new functionality, or I would look at another company. We're going to look at this example called Airops that makes it really easy to do that.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks.
All right. Okay, now we've been only talking a lot about ChatGPT. I don't want to. We've talked about Perplexity, I guess, but there's one more tool that I like to use from a company called Anthropic, and let's go to the example of this. So Anthropic is great because it has 100,000, or I think it's 100,000 token limit, which means I can upload PDFs and books and that. Let's see if I still have a large PDF somewhere. I'm gonna have to find this, but basically what this does is it includes this large context window that you can use all kinds of you can have all kinds of PDFs be analyzed. So let me see if I can find a PDF file and show you guys. And this gets asked, I get asked this very often, like, hey, is there a ChatGPT? Can ChatGPT be used to analyze PDFs? And it does the job, but it's not necessarily the best at it. So for example, see if I can pull this. So if I wanted to analyze this PDF, which is the Etsy 10 Form 10Q, this is usually a very long document, unlike their filings. And if I want to be able to analyze and see what are some of the key insights, I could use ChatGPT, but I tend to use Anthropic, where I will ask it, I will attach the file, and then I will ask it a pretty detailed question, and I'm going to share the. So yeah, I'm going to say, you're a financial analyst with some background. You want to turn around Etsy. There are some financials from the company. Can you give me 20 points about what's important, right? So let's see what this does. Right, while we wait for that, buddy Derek jumped in. I feel like these AI generated images are always a little dark and spooky. completely agree. Yeah, Midjourney is actually really good. I think so I'll give you an example of Midjourney. Let's see, I might be able to pull up Midjourney as well, but that's another really good tool for image generation. It's very expensive. It's about like $30 a month. So if you're open to forking that, it's not a bad way to go, but I would just recommend like using it a lot if you end up investing in that. Okay, so here we go, right? So here's the Etsy's performance review on like what's working, what's not working. I think it's like this is the kind of stuff like, you know, makes it so easy to like analyze. I have a friend who's been doing a dissertation, their PhD dissertation, and you know, one of the use cases they have is they get papers, they get books that like were written in like 1920s that need to be summarized, analyzed. They want to look for particular information in those books, and they can go find those using this Anthropic. And we're going to use this for a quick exercise that we're going to do together. Derek's question is Midjourney still on Discord? I believe so. I don't think it has. Does AI have to be referenced in academic papers? Good question. I don't know the answer to that. I think that a lot of the academic world is just banned it from use and said, hey, you can't use it, but I don't know for sure. If we have filled out our custom instruction, do we still need to feed it with context and tone? No, we don't. That's what it does. It just attaches that context every time it will send the query, so it makes it easy. Okay, well, let's see what's next here. Maybe it's a good time to switch to doing a joint exercise where all of us do some of that together. So the activity I want to do is, if you all want to follow along, is create a podcast. Now I'm going to share my screen and walk you through it. If anybody wants to follow along, please do. And if you have any questions, you get stuck, please ask me. What we're going to do is we're going to create a podcast about George Washington. If you guys want to follow, let's go to Wikipedia and pull up any Wikipedia article you want to create a 10-minute podcast about. I'm gonna let me pick something else. I'll pick Titanic. That's my son's favorite topic these days. Wiki article. All right, this is a super long article about Titanic. I am going to, next step is print it into a PDF. So either save it as a PDF or print it as a PDF. I'm going to do save as PDF. Titanic Wikipedia, that's fine. Now I'm going to go over to Claude, and I am going to attach the Titanic article. And here, I've already run into a problem where the Titanic article is too big for this to, so I can either switch switch the article, or what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna go to the article and remove the last couple of like pages maybe to give me some room. So last pages usually contain a lot of references, so I don't need those. And I think that will give me enough. Yeah, so I'm going to remove all of these pages, delete, and let me try again. And now it's down to 9.6 megabytes. And let's see. All right, I hope everyone was able to find an article, save it as PDF, and next we're gonna go to Claude.ai, log in. They might have you log in with your Gmail you can do that. It's free. I don't think it. And then I'm going to share a script here. I'm going to share it in the chat so everybody can use it. Talking about so it's not about George Washington, it's about the attached topic. Split the podcast into sections, but don't name the sections. And it uses this like storyline, like build a storyline for the podcast. I'm going to share this with folks in the chat. And let's see what it comes up with. So the reason I had to use Claude AI versus ChatGPT is in the past, ChatGPT's context window has been relatively shorter compared to Claude. But so let's see. But this one has about 100,000 tokens or 100,000 words, which means that I can attach sizable amount of files that will turn this into a meaningful, give me a meaningful result or on this type of a prompt. All right, so while this is happening, the next place I'd love for you all to go to is a website called wondercraft.ai and create an account. Again, it'll be free. It won't charge you any money for it. And then this included some of the, all right, so I'm going to copy this. But before I copy this, let me follow along with you all on Wondercraft. So wondercraft.ai is the app. I'm going to share it in the chat as well. And you click on sign in and register. It will, you can put in anything in here. You can put in your actual name, but I'm just going to fill it out with some test parameters. Great. And now need to name this podcast. Next, let's create a new episode. Don't use AI. I already have the script. You can choose a voice. I'm going to keep Anna as the voice. Let's see if I can. And then I'm going to come here and copy this script. Now, I would have cleaned up the script a little bit before doing this, but that's okay. And then I'm going to click generate episode. Now you can make it a lot longer. Obviously, you can add sections, but let's let it go do this while I look at if there are any questions. And has anybody been able to follow along? If any of you have questions, good time to do some debugging. All right, Evelyn, do you have a question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm curious your thoughts on some of the AI detection software out there, whether it's writing your article or we are doing the podcast here. Have you seen anything about those AI detection software that's like demotivating the content because it's using Gen AI technology?
Okay, there's a couple of questions in there. So first question, is there any reliable technology that can detect AI or not? I think the short answer is no. Like the problem is that any detection software is currently catching too many false positives and making it very difficult for it to actually be reliably detected. But I think the more loaded question is that should other people are people getting dissuaded because they're listening to a AI generated AI generated content? And I think that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that question. I think that's a question that will continue to get debated and figured out. I do think that as a matter of AI safety, it is important to let your users know when the user is interacting with purely an AI content versus an AI content that has been built with the help of AI, but still reviewed and published by a human, right? That I think those are two fundamentally different things, and that I think that'll drive a lot of that conversation. And we'll talk a little bit about AI safety when we close out this discussion, and that's an important topic there. All right, so now our podcast is done. I want us to just give it a listen to see if let's see. I'm going to stop sharing one set for a second to make sure that my computer audio is being shared. Share sound. All right, let's listen to this.
John Jacob Astor IV was a prominent American businessman, real estate developer, inventor, and writer who was the richest passenger aboard the Titanic. As a first-class passenger, Astor enjoyed the luxuries and sophistication of high society life. However, he could not foresee the tragedy that was about to unfold. Has a problem. In 1912, Astor planned to return to America on the maiden voyage of the Titanic with his pregnant wife, Madeline. He wanted a safe journey across the Atlantic. However, unknown dangers lay ahead on those cold April nights. The pride of the White Star Line was about to meet its fate, crashing into an iceberg in the North Atlantic and sinking to the ocean floor. And meets a guide, Captain Edward John Smith, the most senior captain of the White Star Line, was regarded as an experienced and capable officer.
I'll pause it there. I mean, you guys get the idea. I hope some of you were able to replicate this. What's interesting is look, we just did a simple exercise of turning a Wikipedia article into a podcast, but the business use cases of this are pretty immense, right? Because you can now turn case studies your company has or marketing material or marketing blogs into podcasts. And, it took us like a few minutes to do this. And you can do this at scale where you're pumping out a lot more content than you would normally if you just continue to do your blogs. So those are the type of things I think we're going to see a plethora of new type of content out there that will now also be searchable, right? Like imagine you publish this podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and now people can search for it, learn about it, and there's a whole new realm of like content generation that now continues to be built. All right, that was one of the things I wanted to make sure everybody gets a chance to like experience and do, and it's so easy to go and make happen. Okay, one other interesting one is anytime you're about to go meet somebody, especially in business meetings, I end up meeting with folks from different companies, and sometimes it's in the context of helping those companies out and building context right prior to that. Normally I'd have somebody who's in a sales team who like prepares a memo for me so I can like read up on that before I go in. And now instead all I do is go to Perplexity and I can share something along the lines of I have a AI consulting business and I am about to meet with a company called Allbirds. Let's share who some of the leaders are and any relevant news about the company. Also share the mission, vision, and values if you can find them. So it kind of came up with a short little response, but I end up using this type of a response especially if I know the name of the person I'm about to go meet. It can do a lot of that search and like get me ready very, very quickly. So that's another kind of use case that I highly recommend. Like if you're meeting people and you need to do all the news search. In the past, you'd have to go through Google and do all that news search, and now I do that pretty easily. I've got a couple of questions before we jump into the next topic. Is there an AI that reads emails? That's a good question. I haven't seen one, but I'm sure that will exist at some point. To make the podcast sound more like a creator, is the option to record your voice? Yes, you can. So even Wondercraft has this, and I believe another company called 11 Labs has this capability where you can upload your voice, and it can convert it to your voice and narrative. And 11 Labs, I recently saw a demo where they can convert it in your voice in any language, and not any language, but whatever languages they have available, like they'll convert it. I just saw like a translation of a YouTube video, and I was just blown away how well it took a YouTube video and converted it to a completely different language, but kept the same tone. So that's definitely available already. Do you have to write your personal bio every time, or can you build a profile? Perplexity, I do not know, but for sure with ChatGPT, you do. Let's see if it has. Yeah, I don't see that feature here, this AI profile. Oh yeah, there we go. There we go. That it does have a bio feature. I just haven't used it. It's a good question. All right. Okay, doing research on a company, we quickly chatted about this. Oops. All right, now let's go to the couple of things that are really interesting. So we're going to cover these 4 things, and then we're going to call it a day. Doing complex data analysis on companies' data. And I'm not going to use transactions data. I have another data set I want to now use for this. But in my opinion, this is the part of ChatGPT that has completely blown me away. And yesterday it was announced that this functionality is now available via API. And what that is this advanced data analytics feature. They used to call it code interpreter. Now it's called advanced data analytics feature. And I can give it text files. So I have passenger bookings for British Airways that I'm going to upload here. And I'm going to give it, see, I have somewhere a prompt I prepared for this as well. So what I wanted to do is analyze this data set in every single way possible. I want to show you what this data set looks like first. So this is, so not this one, but let's see if I can open this up. All right, you guys can see this is like number of passengers, what kind of trip they booked, what route they flew, flight duration, and it has thousands and thousands of lines of data. Now, what I want to do is give it a prompt and say, analyze this data. So I've already uploaded the file, and let's give it a prompt and give it a quick read. So I say, you are a data scientist with aviation industry experience. Do a comprehensive analysis of this data and provide a detailed list of various analysis, both standard and advanced, and then just go run that analysis. So I'm gonna just hit go on this, and I think it's gonna keep going for like 10 minutes or so, and start to analyze this data over time. But we want to see what kind of insights it comes up with. Now, the reason why I was so alarmed by this is literally I used to do, 6 years ago, like this was my job. I would take data sets that were given to me or I got from clients, and then would go into Python or R and literally one analysis at a time, would look at the data, clean the data, figure out what insights I should be looking at. And the fact that this thing just kind of does it all on its own and shows images and generates charts, it's just absolutely mind-blowing in my opinion that this thing can now do that. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up to see what work it did. And you can see it's basically writing Python code in the background. It downloads the data. It looks at all of the looks at the data, and then examines and figures out what kind of insights it's going to run. Now, earlier in the presentation, I talked about the ability of humans to talk to machines. Now, this is the part that's really interesting and exciting. So given this capability, now most of us who are in these management positions know the type of analysis or know the type of questions we want data to answer. And now you can just ask those questions in human language, and it will know how to clean up the data, and it will know what to do with all of that data, and you can literally chat with it as if you're chatting with a data analyst. So my job's been completely obfuscated, so I need to build new skill sets for sure to figure out how to manage this, but I was completely blown away by this. Now, there's a big caveat here. You're looking at this like, hey, look, would I put my company's data on here? Very likely, I'm probably not putting it into ChatGPT. However, ChatGPT has an enterprise model or enterprise API version, which is sitting in the platform part, which let's talk a little bit about. Which is a lot more secure, and you're able to build API-based apps over here. And here they've made this type of capability available where you could just give it data and tell data stories, and we'll look at this in a little bit. I think this part is super fascinating. It just got launched yesterday. The fact that you can now build an app that is privacy safe and is meant for your organization, like that didn't exist until yesterday, and I'm very bullish that this is going to be a very highly effective feature. So you can see this is the stuff it's doing. It's like building the charts and graphs and showing me all the flight analysis. Super interesting, and it's decided which type of analysis to do. And I can like keep asking it more questions about it, right? So I think this is fascinating. I recently did an analysis for foot traffic at libraries in California, and seeing how library foot traffic was impacted by COVID. And I didn't actually do the analysis. I said I did the analysis. This thing did it. I just was able to go find the data on some of the California government websites, and it kind of did all of that analysis and figured out where the files were named incorrectly. So I think this is super, super cool. All right, let's move along. I want to show you building presentations with AI. All right, to show this, I'm going to have to close, or let's create go to another tab. Let's go here. Gamma app. So I use this app called Gamma app, and it's basically automating a lot of the presentation building. There are two ways to do this. One is I can give it a bunch of text and it can generate the whole presentation based on the outline I give it. Or I could give it a topic and it will generate this for me. So let's do an example. Sounds good. What would you like to be on the page? What should we build? Let's see. I'm gonna build a printing shop in Santa Monica, catering to folks who like to come to farmers market. A very random butter. Okay, so all right, this is what I'm gonna do. You can also try again. I pick the theme. Picks the images for me. And obviously, every single thing that is given here is editable. So I don't have to like keep any of these slides if I don't like them. But I go from this to sharing this link publicly. There we go, share publicly and copy public link. Boom, I have a website ready. Took us 4 minutes to build this draft website that shows us that anybody can access, obviously. So that's the website, but if I wanted to build a presentation, I could do the same thing. I can like modify the present, like I can give it an outline, it'll build the presentation. So for talks and stuff, like super helpful. So this this software is not free. It costs I think like $10 or $20 a month, something along those lines. But I use it often. You can see my current presentation I'm sharing with you is built in this. So this is super helpful and has changed my workflow on what I use to build presentations. Now, obviously, there are still like some things like that Google Slides and PowerPoint does that are really good, but you can bet that both Google Slides and Microsoft PowerPoint are going to have this type of capability. Like this is just a matter of time before tools like Duet on the Google side and Fabric on the Microsoft side just take over and are able to do exactly some of the stuff that we were able to just see right now. So it's coming for sure. All right, now let's do one little exercise of like, you're like, we could say, hey, look, we've looked at a bunch of different tools and bunch of like small use cases, but what if you're an Excel junkie and you want an AI app that can be scaled and can be used for multiple rows of true like data science analytics type work? So for that, I will share this tool called Airops. I think this is a really, really interesting tool. It's free to get started. And what you can do is you can build agents. You can have it do a few different apps. So for example, I'm going to exit out of this. So let's save this draft. Maybe I open up a different one. So you have a bunch of apps here that you can build. If I do create new app, I can start with a blank app and then create you can select GPT models and you can have it come up with answers. So for example, I can configure variables. So let's say add a couple of fields, name, and then let's see, variable name is name. That's good. Save this field, and then I'll add one more field, topic. And here, help. So what I can do is opening remarks, user. I don't need any of this stuff, but what I will do is I want write an email on behalf of this on the topic of save changes. And let's see, utility. This should work. Let's see if we test this. And let's see if you run it. Oh, email. And it just writes the email. But anyway, the thing I wanted to show you that's more interesting here is you can build these apps where you can string it together. But let's say that we try to solve a very specific problem, which is sentiment analysis. Let's say that I have a example of bunch of reviews I've gotten from Yelp or my product review, and I want to now view the sentiment of this. What you can do here is you can create this app, and let's take a look at what's this app doing. It's taking some input text, looking at what are the different categories I can put those inputs in, and this like thing that says multi-sentiment or not. And then I've built a bit of a complex prompt here where it says, try to identify if the emotions in this review are positive or not, and literally spit it out in terms of JSON format. And what I can do is save changes and test this app. So I'm going to take one of the reviews from here and see what the output looks like. And let's say the categories can be positive or negative. And multi-sentiment is false. Hit execute. And it says, all right, I found some positive keywords, some negative keywords, and I'm going to give it a positive score of 0.9 as a very positive review. All right, great. I got my basic app running. Now what I can do is I can not only do that, but I can publish this app. And let me embed it into Google Sheets. So in Google Sheets, what this will show up as, you have to add your, you have to install a plugin on Google Sheets, but now it's just a simple formula that uses this. So let's try to see if we can deploy this formula to this Google Sheet here. So got that wrong. It's going to go on this text. Positive, negative, and false is the, all right. So it's loading. Let's see if it works. If it works, then I'm going to apply it to all the 10 different reviews. And sometimes it takes a minute. And while it loads, I'll make sure that this is set up correctly. There we go. So these were the positive words, negative words, score, sentiment. And not only that, what I can do now is I can take this formula and just expand it to all of the cells. And now you can see that I'll be able to get a count of all the positive sentiment scores, negative sentiment scores. Might take a minute, but it's coming back with some of these scores. All right, any questions on this stuff? All right, cool. So this is super interesting, right? Like I can now do the counts of how many positive reviews I'm getting, how many negative reviews I'm getting. I can also create some feedback systems on based on these reviews, what product would you recommend the company create, or what improvements should the company use, right? So there's quite a few things that can be done there. All right, so we just did the sentiment analysis, and then I'm going to close it out with one last thing that is very relevant and I think is brand new. Let's see. So I go to platform.openai. So all of the, we talked about a lot of the basic use cases that I'm implementing, but a lot is going on. Things are moving really, really fast in this world, and almost every day new stuff is coming out. Yesterday, OpenAI launched this concept of assistants, where you can create your own ChatGPT assistant. So you can go and say, I'm going to create a travel helper. You look at tickets, or actually, let's do something more interesting. Let's do, actually, the travel helper is good. Help people create trip plans for their upcoming travel. And you can give it different models. So GPT-4 11.06 preview is their most up-to-date model. I don't need code interpreter, but I can just save it here. And then I can test this model, but I can also deploy it using the API. So this is where, if you do have the desire to go build apps using or take your current products and build out apps, this is a really great place to first test it. I am traveling to Panama next week. Can you help me create a day-by-day plan? So you might ask, like, hey, like, what's so different about this compared to running it via ChatGPT? The idea here is you're creating your own instance of an app, and it can be custom trained and custom instructions on what it would do. You could give it files on what what files might be relevant to it, depending on the retrieval capability. So I can upload specific files and create a bot that it will answer questions for that type of query. All right, let's see, any other questions on this? I don't see any other hands raised. There's a discussion on training staff. Let's quickly chat about. Oh, that's a good question. Is in this instance, can you have it read dynamic prices? So while I can do that here, the idea is that this is giving me these APIs so that I can tie it. If there was another API that could like pull dynamic pricing from, let's say, kayaks of the world, it can then use that data to inform its query. So that's the possibility this new development opens up, that you can now have talk to other APIs. Another use case might be like real estate, right? Like thinking of monitoring prices and answering questions about that. So you will see for sure a lot more apps that evolve and come out over the course of the next several weeks here. Correct. So Ajay's question is, can you upload all your project manager data? You should be able to upload all your project management data here and create a custom app, which is also secure and safe and is not being used for training by ChatGPT or OpenAI. All right, folks, we have about 20 minutes remaining. I just want to quickly recap. So this was an example of creating your own agent. I want to recap what all the practical use cases we covered. So we covered writing basic ChatGPT custom instructions, making sure your prompts have enough words to make the prompt results meaningful. We learned the concept of few-shot learning and generating images. We analyzed PDFs with AI. We did not analyze websites with AI, but you guys have seen the perplexity which you can do. We did not cover image analysis with AI, which I can give a quick example of this before we close out. I think that's a fun example. Doing research on company before meeting people, that's one use case I use this for quite a bit. Creating podcasts and other topics. There are other tools we haven't even talked about, which is Canva, which does creative and copy design. It does a really good job of that. Complex data analysis, building presentations with AI. And then we talked a little bit about building a couple of apps. There are lots of good YouTube videos out there as well that help people get a sense of what is all possible. But let's close it out with this one example. So I recently went to my doctor for getting my blood work done, and wanted to share, see if I can find this. lab reports and show you like, and now I might be divulging some, let me just confirm I'm not doing that. Any PII or personally identifiable information that I don't want to share. Okay, I'm gonna share just the test results. So what you can do is you can paste in, let's see if I can copy just the diagnosis parts and not my social security number. Okay, I'm gonna paste parts of my, let's see, did not work. Parts of my lab report to see if I can. All right, you guys can see it now. So I have like some, random lab report work that got done. I'm gonna save this file and then bring it in here. Desktop screenshot that we just took. You are a GP who can review blood work and make suggestions for what tests I should do next. Obviously, like I would trust the doctor way over this, so I'm not suggesting that you do that, but I was surprised to see how that it can like take an image and analyze blood work and give me back analysis. Oh, I didn't even realize it would do deep data analysis. Wow. Let's see what it comes back with. It's giving me like actual things it's reading. And it's for some reason so much slower than I would have expected. It's kind of giving me a full analysis. What I really liked about it, which we don't have to wait for it, is it was able to not only look at some of my obvious things, but it had some talking points that I could bring up with the doctor. And I was just completely blown away by the fact that it was able to do that. All right, I'll pause here on some of the demo stuff. I want to share one important topic, which is safety of AI, and then we'll do key takeaways and close things out. So from a safety perspective, now there's a lot more talk in the government around regulation, which I'm really appreciating. But here are some basic rules that I recommend for safety. One, ensuring data privacy. So making sure no private data is going to anybody that it shouldn't go to, right? So if you're going to use some sort of a model, know what kind of guidelines or privacy policies they have and what gets shared or what doesn't get shared. Transparency and accountability is all about impersonation of other humans. Like that's obviously illegal anyway, but making sure that that's not what AI gets used for. I have a big, I had to do this training for one of the Congress members recently, and a big discussion topic there was the 2024 elections in the US. I think that it's going to be one of the most bot-filled, not only will you have bots, but you'll also have AI in the mix, which will make it very, very hard to understand the misinformation campaign, and it'll make it very challenging. So the important thing here is anytime you're building a system that will interact with other human beings, making sure that you're clearly stating that they know, the end consumer knows that they're speaking to or interacting with a AI versus human. And then maintaining the human in the loop where possible, I think is really, really important. And then lastly, data lineage is important. So one of the things I mentioned earlier when I was explaining what generative AI does is it uses neural networks, which makes it very, very hard to understand why the logic or the algorithm came up with the answer that it did come up with. So in order to mitigate that, this data lineage concept or being able to tell the source of the data is really important. So being mindful of that. So I think these three rules, if one keeps in mind, you can pretty much stay clear of most of the pitfalls of generative AI implementation issues. Lastly, I want to share a couple of key takeaways. So that might be not very intuitive. So I would recommend testing out Claude.ai in addition to ChatGPT. ChatGPT is great, but Claude.ai seems to have some powerful, larger context capabilities. I highly recommend reading the book The Coming Wave by Mustafa Suleyman, who is one of the founders of DeepMind. And I think his book is one of the ones that I found really inspiring and also scary at the same time, because you get to learn not only what are some of the potential future opportunities, but some of the things we have to be mindful of. We already talked about Perplexity.ai as your default homepage. I highly recommend trying it. Last two things, setting up your ChatGPT custom instruction persona, and following that, Ben's Bite. So if you are interested or want to know if you're interested in this technology or in this field, I recommend signing up for a newsletter called Ben's Bites, which is a daily newsletter. It concises all of the news into like 3 or 4 bullets every day. If you sign up for it and you end up finding yourself reading it every day for weeks at a time, then you're probably going to be you'll find continued interest in this field. And if not, that's okay as well. All right, lastly, a couple of tools. So here, I often get asked, Imad, like, what tools are you using today? So here are the ones that we already talked about, but I use ChatGPT quite a bit for a lot more than what's listed here, now that they have the image analysis capabilities as well. The enterprise version that we talked about, Zapier, N8N, and Airops. Zapier is also really, really great. It's really figured out how to use ChatGPT to initiate a lot of the zaps and can do that type of work. We talked about Wondercraft for podcast, Gamma app for presentations today, although I do expect both Google and Microsoft to very quickly replace their current slides capability with new features that will have this type of capability. Midjourney, we didn't cover a lot, but Midjourney has been my go-to tool for image generation, but now DALL-E is available directly in ChatGPT, makes it a lot easier. And then Claude.ai for PDF analysis. All right, I know we have 10 more minutes to go. This is perfect time for those of you who've stuck around for the last 2 hours. I appreciate it, but also want to open it up to any Q&A. Feel free to just unmute yourself, unmute your camera and your mic and ask away.
Imad, this is really great. Thank you very much for all the information. It's unbelievable. In terms of introducing, we're just in the initial stages of, kind of analyzing how this is going to impact our business. But in terms of introducing this from kind of management right on down through the organization, are there some best practices you've seen within other companies to do this in a way that, keeps things under control? I use these tools almost all the time, all day, and they're really helpful for me. And but also don't want to end up in a situation where I have people going down rabbit holes. And just in terms of just implementation of some of these tools and educating your staff on some of these tools and taking away the fear of implementing these tools. Do you have any kind of insights on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can share with you what I have seen other leaders do that seems to be a good strategy. Number one is being open to it and setting training sessions up that may be like a day-long workshop, or somehow like enabling everybody to like feel comfortable with what can and cannot be used. enabling some policies around it as well. So making sure that, your data is not getting uploaded to Claude.ai, and all of a sudden now you're worried about, all kinds of NDA related issues that might be, difficult. And then as you get more advanced, what we're seeing is some companies are building like Slack bots or their own internal version and saying, hey, this is okay to use. Like, we've okayed this. And if you use the Slack bot, it also has access to retrieval augmented generation, which means it can talk to your own data set as well. So there's that component of it. The three different like vectors of learning are: one, educating the executive team; two, educating and enabling the teams; and third, looking at your own products and processes where this can have a long-term impact. Not everybody's product is going to have an impact, but there's probably certain companies that have a lot of potential leverage. And one last thing I'll say about that is my thesis on this stuff now is that companies that are sitting on a lot of data and have distribution to customers are the ones that are the best poised to take advantage of this technology from a revenue generation perspective, right? If you have those two things, you should be going really hard at figuring out how to build and scale this inside your organization.
Great, thank you.
All right, David.
Actually, Derek, do you have a question? Let him go ahead, then I'll go.
All right, David, I'll jump in after you.
I guess, how much do you see this affecting digital identity? Like, do you use some of these tools to update your website or whatever it is? But yeah, any impact for digital identity?
I think digital identity is going to have quite a bit of implications, but again, so far it seems like it's with human in the loop. If you think about just a simple thing as a resume, right? If somebody's not using some of these tools to make their resumes better, it's you gotta be doing that, and that probably goes to every other form of digital identity. I think there are some major debates in the social aspect of things and what impact this has on social media. I alluded to the upcoming elections, what impact that will have. But yeah, it's a very good point on how much impact this will have on digital identity. Derek, you want to go next?
It's awesome, man. This was really great. This isn't so much a question, but I think maybe a suggestion, something for the future if you're doing more of these. But I mean, the most mind-bending thing you showed today was the data analysis capability. Like, that is so incredibly cool. And I would just love to see a deeper dive on that and using some of the tools that can do it in a privacy safe way where we could use our business data without, concerns about where we're sharing it. Like, that to me is like,
yeah,
wow, it would be really cool to see more about that. But this has been amazing. So
yeah, thank you. No, I agree. Like, I mean, look, the code, it used to be called code interpreter, now data analysis. And the biggest question, the reason nobody really used it is like, hey, I'm not shipping my data over to OpenAI like the CSV files of like my core data set tables. And they literally launched the API version of it yesterday, which falls under their platform. And I'm like, all right, now we can definitely. So I think you're absolutely right, and that's going to be for sure next like iteration of how we end up using this. All right, well, awesome. Thanks everyone. I really appreciate everyone who stuck around. For those who had to drop off, we recorded the call, so we'll send out the recording in the next couple of days to everyone who's registered, and really appreciate it. Please reach out if you have any questions. You can reach out on LinkedIn, and you can reach out to me directly via email, and I'll share that in the follow-up email as well. All right, thanks everyone. Have a good one.
Thank you, Ahmed.